Well, last week we started our study through the book of Daniel. There's only 12 chapters, so this is not going to take 2 years or anything, unless God changes my mind. But anyway, last week we covered chapter 1, and before I get started this morning, I want to make a disclaimer and apologize because I misrepresented some information last week. It was not concerning Scripture. Rest assured, hopefully that's a relief to you. What I did misunderstand was when Islam got started. When I searched it on Google and it came up, I saw 610 and I saw a C in there. Well, because the world has decided to not rate years based on the life of Christ, because they want to deny his existence to some extent, it's CE now, which is the AD. And so that's 610 AD. That was a mistake on my part, and I apologize. Fred lovingly brought that to my attention, and I encourage any of you that if you hear me say something that's wrong or just go, what was that? I will hear you, okay? Chapter 1, God's Word, which is not influenced by man and not able to, well, I guess people can twist it. But we started last week looking at the life of this really 4 young men, Daniel being one of them, as they were being exiled to Babylon from Judah because of Judah's continued effort to walk away from the Lord and to not honor him and to not make him the Lord of their lives. The end result of the first chapter was really this whole idea of indoctrination. King Nebuchadnezzar wanted to bring all of these youth without blemish, all of the warriors, all of the nobility into Babylon to use them to make Babylon better, but he was also not just going to leave them the way he found them. He was going to indoctrinate them in the ways of Babylon. Ultimately, Daniel and his cohorts decided that they were not going to give in to and just eat the food that the king told them to eat or drink the wine, that they were going to purpose their hearts after the Lord, to not defile themselves. And God gave them favor because they purposed their hearts. Even found them to be 10 times more effective than the wise men of Babylon. What's interesting as we get into this next chapter, because this is going to, the chapter 2 deals with this dream that God gives King Nebuchadnezzar. And it's interesting that chapter 1 ends with that they were 10 times more effective, 10 times wiser than the wise men of Babylon. And we're going to get to see a little bit of who these wise men were and why they considered themselves to be wise. But let's just read here in verse 1 and get started. So in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king, and the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you show the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards in great honor. Therefore show me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and said, let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will show its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see that the word from me is firm. If you do not make the dream known to me, there is but one sentence for you. You have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the times change. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can show me its interpretation. So the culture of Babylon was centered around pagan worship. And I used that word last week, and I may not have defined that. The word pagan covers a huge list of beliefs. The word pagan actually means anything that's not Judeo-Christian beliefs. So if it's not Christian, it is pagan. But we're looking at this list here of these people that the king is enlisting to help him, and he lists the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and Chaldeans, which are really astrologers. That's what essentially, the Chaldeans has a dual meaning. We'll get to that in a minute. But it means both people from a certain geographic area as well as people that are astrologers. So why did he go to these guys to ease his anxiety? Because they were connected with the gods. Okay, that's a little g, God, which are really fallen angels and also known to us as demons. And they did this because it is a job of demonic forces in this world to amaze us, to distract us, and to lure humans into believing that they have all the power. As I studied this passage, a passage I've read many, many times, I wanted to break down each of these wise sources and look at what they really are and why that matters. And it's interesting that several of them have the same meaning. They all eventually point back to one thing. So magicians, the biblical usage for this is a diviner, a magician, an astrologer. It also includes, so in astrology includes this. It also means engraver, writer, only in a derivative sense of one possessed of occult knowledge. And so there's this thing called a cult, which is, something that's other than Christianity. And then there's the occult, which is actually demonic, satanic powers, okay? So the definition includes a horoscope. So this is not just astrology. Astrology is part of magic. You think about the Wiccan witch covens that are here in Missoula. They study astrology. They look to the stars. New Age practices, they look to the stars, okay? So a horoscopist is drawing magical lines or circle, a magician. So those are the definitions of that word. We'll see a kind of a pattern here. So enchanters, biblical usage, a necromancer is another name, a conjurer, astrologer, here's that word again, enchanter, exorcist. By definition, a conjurer or astrologer. There's the astrology again. Sorcerers were the one that was different. It didn't mention astrology anywhere in this, but this is someone that is set to practice witchcraft or sorcery. Use witchcraft, sorcerer, sorceress is another name. By definition, this is the Strong's Concordance definition. That's where I'm getting this definition from, just so you know. So properly, to whisper a spell, i.e. to enchant or practice magic, a sorcerer, to use witchcraft, okay? So Chaldeans, well, let's look at that real quick. A territory in lower Mesopotamia bordering on the Persian Gulf. So geographically, that's where these people come from. The inhabitants of Chaldea, living in the lower Euphrates and Tigris area. Those persons considered the wisest in the land. By extension, also an astrologer. So linguistic research has demonstrated that the Babylonian word for an astrologer, also priest in their pagan rituals and temples, is their word for their supposed master race, where homonyms, both having the sound Chaldean, but each retaining their own meaning. So the main point here is that all of these are looking to a power outside themselves. As I encountered this word astrology, how many of you have heard that name for years or that word for years? And to be honest with you, I have a difficulty at some level going, is it astronomy or astrology, which is bad, just because I don't really delve into that stuff. And so astrology, I wanted to delve into that a little bit. And I go and I've did some research, looked at definitions, obviously. But in my research, came across a gal that used to be an astrologer. She used to be a medium. That's more what we know them as these days. And as she described what she would do, she said a true medium would be able to channel evil spirits, what she now knows to be evil spirits. And here's the thing we need to understand about Satan and his demons. I'm not trying to freak anybody out here. But ultimately, Satan's demons have been sent out into this world, and we talked about this Friday night at the men's barbecue. They've been sent out into this world to watch us and use what they see against us. So when somebody goes to a medium to try and understand information about a dead loved one or their future or whatever, the spirits that are being channeled have information on that person's life or the people's lives that are dead and gone. And so that's why it is so real. So it's not the fact that person has a special gift. Like they're not a medium because they were born that way. They are a medium because they have decided to go and connect with evil spirits that will give them information to be able to predict futures, to be able to tell them the very detailed facts about dead loved ones. And that, personally, I think that's why the king here is going, I want to know that you're real, that what you're telling me about my dreams is not a bunch of fluff, it is the truth. Because I'm not even going to tell you the dream. Because what she said about fake mediums is that they will just kind of ask you general probing questions about this person you're wanting to connect with, and they try and ask you enough information to where they can start to guess and see if you bite on certain details. So it's just very interesting. There's so much more that I could talk about with astrology. We look at horoscopes and we think, oh, let's go look at, I'm a Pisces, and so let's go see what that means. And unless we're aware, we have no idea that is a tool of the devil that he is using to cause you, because what are you looking for? I want to know what's to come. I want to know what to expect. I want to know have this deeper knowledge. And that is exactly where Satan started with Eve in the garden. When she's been told, do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and he starts to make accusations about God and tempt her to believe that she can really be like God and have this deeper knowledge. Okay, so this is not some fun-loving little innocent thing that they're delving into, or that we could delve into. Webster's definition of an astrologer is one who professes to foretell future events by the aspects and situation of the stars. So what's the big deal with the king demanding that these guys tell him the dream and interpretation? It's because they would have known, if they were truly wise in the sense of being able to understand. And by the way, dreams, as we heard when Brian shared his testimony, the devil can give us dreams. Okay? And so at that level as well, with the magicians and the sorcerers and all those guys, if they had really been in connection with the evil spirits, they could have told him his dream as well. This whole sermon I titled, and I don't normally tell what the titles are because that's, I don't know, it's just kind of weird. But is who has the power? And so these guys are going through their lives, these wise men that are looking to evil spirits. They are the wise men to this king, this pagan king he's troubled by his dreams and wants to know what it all means. And they are looking to everyone but the Lord for that. The king made his demands very clear, and so did the wise men. He said, tell me the dream and its interpretation, and they're trying to buy time. And they're also going to tell the king that he's unreasonable. It says in verse 10, the Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who can meet the king's demand. For no great or powerful king has asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The last statement from the Chaldeans revealed the truth. The thing that the king asks is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. At least they got some of it right. And he doesn't exist with flesh yet, because God is going to send his son Jesus to this earth. And they were looking to all the wrong gods. All the little g, shouldn't even call them gods. They're just fallen angels that have powers. They knew there was where the power came from, but they knew that even that wasn't powerful enough to fulfill the king's request. As true as this statement might be, it was not the best truth to confront the king with. Remember, we talked about the king being a vengeful and violent. I mean, he said he would tear them limb for limb. How many of you have heard that statement and really not ever known what it meant? So one of the things I read, and this was really disturbing, but they would take a person and position them between 4 trees, and they would bend the trees over and hold them down. Then they would tie the person's limbs one to each tree, and then cut the cords, and he would literally be yanked into pieces. So glad we kept the kids in here today. This is the Bible. Channeling my Tim Hawkins voice there. Anyway, verse 12. So because of this, the king was angry and very furious and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. So the decree went out, and the wise men were about to be killed, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Then Daniel replied with prudence. You got to look at all the words in Scripture. Replied with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He declared to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is the decree of the king so urgent?" He didn't say it was unreasonable. He says, why is it so urgent? Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel, and then Daniel went in and requested the king to appoint him a time that he might show the interpretation to the king. Daniel, when sought out to be killed, and as I'm looking at the life of Daniel in this story, I'm thinking, man, how would I react if I heard that every guy that was in my position was about to be killed, and it was ordered by the king? I might be freaking out just a little bit if I didn't know where my hope lied or laid. When they sought him out, he didn't panic and run off. He didn't fall down crying, pleading for his life. He replied to the message of the captain of the king's guard with prudence and discretion. I love this definition of prudence, because we think of prudence, all I can hear is George W. Bush, or maybe it was H. Bush going, it wouldn't be prudent. But anyway, it implies caution in deliberating and consulting on the most suitable means to accomplish valuable purposes, and the exercise of sagacity, which is sage, wise knowledge, in discerning and selecting them. This is somebody else's words, obviously. This is a definition of prudence. Prudence differs from wisdom in this, that prudence implies more caution and reserve than wisdom, or is exercised more in foreseeing and avoiding evil than in devising and executing that which is good. It is sometimes mere caution or circumspection. Essentially, Daniel thought before he spoke. He considered the right way to go about handling a situation and approached the authorities that came to him in a way that didn't just buy him some time to get him out of trouble. It allowed him to understand the situation and then take that situation to the Lord, which is the most important part. In verse 17, it says, Then Daniel, and this is probably one of the most powerful sections in this entire chapter, not even that he predicted or understood the dream and gave its interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, and told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. What we see in these verses is Daniel once again being prudent and discerning, this time in how it pertained to him knowing what to do with the king's request. What did he do? He took the urgent need to his friends who had also purposed their hearts for the Lord and asked them to seek mercy with him together. They prayed. They fervently prayed, God, we're about to be taken out, but I'm not even worried about it because you have ordained all of this. You think about this. They've been exiled. They're being tested every day. They're being ruled over by a vengeful, violent, deadly, vindictive king who's now put this expectation out there that nobody in their own power could do this. The only way for this to work out good is for God to intervene, and they knew that. And so they sought the mercy, or compassion is another word, pity from God to help them. It wasn't just a prayer of a desperate, God-fearing man. It was the collective prayers of men who realized that it was God and God alone who could deliver not only the mystery and meaning, but deliver them from certain death. It was only when they had sought mercy that God revealed everything to them. And their response to the Lord's delivery and deliverance was a prayer of praise. Look at verse 20. It says, Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. And that's going to have to do with the vision or the dreams that he was having. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. As I read this, and one of the things I try and do anytime I'm studying the New Testament or anytime I'm preaching on the New Testament or the Old Testament is I look to the other testament for proof or direction that would echo. Because the world wants to say the God of the Old Testament is a horrible, vengeful God, and it can't be the same as the New Testament. And they are the same. As I was thinking about Daniel and his companions, it is the same heart that we should enter into the fight. When we met the other night for the men's barbecue, it was literally calling the men to pray for each other, to bind together. The prayer of a righteous man accomplishes much. It's at the end of, I think, verse 16. The prayer of a righteous man. Can you imagine the prayers of righteous men collectively? Praying over the men of this church, praying over the churches all over this world, praying over the families of this church. And that's what we called each other up to. But in Romans 8:26 to 28, most of us know 28 like the back of our hand. But in verse 26, it says, likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weaknesses, or in our weakness. For we do not know what to pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And he who searches hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. Now, I'm going to butcher this, but Joanna posted a meme the other day. You shared it. Anyway, basically says that when you pray, you're either going to get exactly what God wanted for you, or you're going to get what he knew you needed even if you didn't seek him. So praying according to the will of God. When we do that, we know that we can have what he desires for us because it's his will. So it's really a matter of aligning our will with his. Verse 28, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to His purpose. And we won't know His purpose until we seek Him and actually ask Him to reveal His purpose for us, or open His Word and read what His purpose is for us. So again, it goes back to chapter 1. Are we purposing our hearts toward His purpose for our lives? Now let's look at the... You going to send it to me? I wanted to get the words exactly right earlier, but I couldn't find it. God either gives you what you ask for in prayer, or He gives you what you would have asked for if you had known what He knows. That's way better than what I said. So let's look at the dream. Verse 24. Therefore Daniel went in to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste and said thus to him, I have found among the exiles of Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, Are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? So it's the same standard. Daniel answered the king and said, No wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show the king the mystery that the king has asked.
But there's a God in heaven
who reveals mysteries, and He has made known to the king Nebuchadnezzar that what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, became thoughts of what would be after this. And He who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, that you may know the thoughts of your mind. You saw, O king, and behold, a great image, this image mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them to pieces, broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken into pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Daniel could have taken what God gave him and used it as a means to get ahead in life. Our nation, I've not really paid much attention to churches in other nations or even, pastors and who does what. And I don't spend a lot of time tracking pastors in the U.S. But if you look at any pastor that ends up going off the deep end, I would be willing to guarantee you that at some point they felt God's call on their life. And they started serving the Lord and taking the gift that He had given them and using it for His glory. And at some point they lost sight of where that gift came from, and they started focusing on the fact that they had that gift. And they started using it as a sense of power, whether that was to do things inappropriate or to just try and take all the glory, which is also inappropriate. Daniel didn't do that. He could have taken this moment to take all the glory. The key to a good and faithful servant of the Lord is that they take no glory for themselves. They don't even try to make a good appearance with false humility. They give all the glory to God. Daniel was determined to make the God of the universe known even to the king who at that moment held him captive. Look back at verse 28. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. So what does it all mean? I want to stop for just a second and remind you what I said last week, that a lot of theologians, or some theologians, have issue with whether Daniel was the actual author because the prophecies and the predictions that God gave him were too accurate. And we talked about how silly that is. But I'm going to read through this, and I'm going to take you through the fulfillment of what was seen after that and what has not yet been seen. So in verse 36 it says, This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the king of kings, small k's by the way, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom, but some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, this is key, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation sure. That's a bold statement, by the way, and there's only one way you could make it, is that if you knew it came from God. Nebuchadnezzar was clearly said to be the head of gold. After him would come three other kingdoms, each represented by the different materials Nebuchadnezzar saw in the dream. After the succession of the kingdoms, they came to a final kingdom set up by God. Talbot says this, Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom was likened unto gold because it was an absolute monarchy, God's ideal government. Except God's ideal would be for him to be the king. Nebuchadnezzar was not, however, God's ideal monarch. This statement, the dream is certain and the interpretation is sure. This prophetic dream was clearly fulfilled in history. Let's look how. Three dominating empires came after Babylon: Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. The nature of these empires was accurately reflected in the nature of the image Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream. The empires succeeding Babylon were inferior to Nebuchadnezzar's head of gold in the sense that their centralization of absolute power. Nebuchadnezzar was an absolute monarch, and the succeeding empires were progressively less so. They were larger and lasted longer than Babylon, but none held as much centralized power as Nebuchadnezzar did. Newell said this, behold, Babylon, the head of gold, was an absolute autocracy. Persia, monarchical, something. Anyway, with nobles equal to the king in all but office. It's represented by silver. Greece is set forth by brass, indicating the still lower value of an aristocracy of mind and influence. Rome, a democratic imperialism with military dominion dependent upon the choice of army and citizenry and administered in the spirit of martial law as set forth by the iron. The third kingdom of bronze was one which shall rule over all the earth. Indeed, Alexander's Grecian empire was the largest among those compared in the image, except for the final government of the Messiah. The Babylonian Empire stood for 66 years. The Medo-Persian Empire was for 208 years. The Grecian Empire was 185 years, and the Roman for 500 years. This last statement about this last kingdom, this described the fulfillment of this prophecy in the future. The stone was cut without hands, and it shatters the confederation of kings represented by the feet of the image, and then God's kingdom will dominate the earth. So since the Roman Empire historically did not fulfill this federation of kings, what seems the number 10, notice how he points out the toes. How many toes do humans have? There's 10 toes. There's 2 passages in the Bible that talk specifically about this. Daniel 7:24. It says, and for the 10 horns, it's just the number, that's the similarity. And we'll talk about why it's different in a minute. Out of this kingdom, 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. That's Daniel 7:24. Look at Revelation 17:12. And the 10 horns that you saw were 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. So since the fall of the Roman Empire, there has never been a world-dominating empire equal to Rome. Based on the image's meaning, iron symbolizing the Roman Empire, the mixture of iron and clay suggests that the Roman Empire, in some form or another, will be revived under the leadership of the final fallen dictator, the Antichrist. This kingdom of iron and clay toes, this federation of 10 kings, is the final superpower of the world, thought to be the revival of the Roman Empire. This will be the final world empire that the returning Jesus will conquer over. Let's look at verse 44 again real quick. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. Everything that's going on in the Middle East right now, and everything that's depicted in the book of Revelation, is about Israel. When we are brought into the family of God, what nation are we adopted into? In the nation of Abraham, as is stated in Galatians 3:29. So it will never be for another people, because those left will belong to that people. Okay? It shall break into pieces all the kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. The kingdom that is established here and set up with Jesus reigning over it on the earth is the millennial kingdom after the Battle of Armageddon at the end of 7-year tribulation. So it's part of why I wanted to go through Daniel, and I believe the Lord led me to do Daniel, because when we're going through Matthew 24 and all of the signs of the times at the end of the age, that just started resonating in me, especially because of everything that's going on in the world around us, okay? So what stone is being discussed here? The same stone mentioned throughout the Bible, the stone that the builders rejected, the cornerstone, Jesus Christ. Psalm 118:22, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Some 40 years from this, Daniel receives a vision describing the same succession of empires. Daniel will see this from God's perspective, whereas Nebuchadnezzar saw it from man's perspective. Nebuchadnezzar saw these empires as an impressive image. Daniel will see these as fierce beasts. Verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that an offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, "Truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery." Then the king gave Daniel high honors and made great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court. One thing that I found interesting is you look at this, because in the middle of this chapter it mentions them by their Hebrew names, and here by their Babylonian names. It's simply because that was recorded that way in the Babylonian records is why Daniel is referring to them by their Babylonian names. Okay? He's not actually accepting those as their names. Okay? Daniel not only had his life spared, but he was promoted to high office, and he made sure his friends were also promoted. It was fitting that Daniel's friends got to share in his advancement, because they accomplished much of the victory through their prayers. You know, as we think about this story and what Daniel and his cohorts were up against, what these wise men were up against, it's interesting. And also, you can go back and look, but Daniel doesn't just say, "Yeah, you can kill all them, but I've got the truth." He said, "Don't kill them." That's that heart of compassion that Daniel had because of the compassion that he was shown by the Lord to give him the help that he needed. In this life that we're living right now today, we can feel like sometimes we are up against powers that we cannot beat, that are insurmountable. And I think it's important as we read this account of Daniel standing firm that his help was going to come from the Lord. And he was not going to compromise. He wasn't going to fret and panic and everything. He was just going to go to the Lord in prayer and be faithful to the Lord. It reminds me of the rest, or part of the rest of chapter 8 of Romans. In verse 31 it says, "What then shall we say to these things? This world that we live in, and everything that just seems to be overtaking us in some ways. The nation that we live in is not the nation that we grew up in, for those of us that are older. If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things?" Everything that we need to be able to live out this life that's going to get harder in some senses. It's going to be more of a struggle. He's going to give us everything that we need to be able to face it. And we can also look to that stone that was not cut with human hands, that became a mountain to rule over all. We can cling to that truth, knowing that there's going to be a day that we will have everything that we ever hoped for in the Lord. Okay? If God is for us, who can be against us? Hold on to that.
And trust him.
That he will give us what we need to follow him and serve him. Let's pray.